One. Got that pretty close.
Pretty close.
Got that pretty close, boys.
Got
I just did a
timing.
countdown. Yeah, it was good. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be back this week. I'm feeling good.
Oh, yeah. I'm
feeling like I
pretty
just
good.
drank 2 Red Bulls back to back. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We are fueled by energy drinks tonight.
Oh, boy, oh, are we. So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Get the Mic, the podcast where your hosts on the left, Owl,
And your host on the right, Brok.
talk about the mythological significance of fiction. And today, obviously, we're still talking about Dragon Ball. We haven't finished our series yet. Though I will say some housekeeping things. We'll be having some changes in the future. We'll let you guys know more as we get to that point. For now, though, kick back and enjoy the show.
Yeah, we've been
Our
discussing a
normal show.
bit about how we could change up the structure of it. So, probably some changes to come.
Right. Well, I think we can get right into it. Today, we're going to be talking about Find That Stone. Episode,
Find that stone.
I believe, 15 of the actual Dragon Ball record, but our episode 16 here.
It's
Now-
titled Episode 17.
Oh, did we already do 16? Hold on.
I can never keep up with it. This also in English is called The Rock Hunt.
The Rock Hunt.
Training - The Rock Hunt.
Huh. Yeah, 16. Oh, well. It doesn't really matter. Point being, we're ready to get right into it, I believe. Let's get back here. So, today we start off our episode right after last time. And what happened last time? Just a quick recap. They found Launch.
Right. They managed their bargain with Roshi and brought him a peachy gal. But
Yes.
of course, it wasn't any regular peachy gal because she was wanted by the police and she has a dual persona.
Right. It's almost like she's more than just a damsel in distress.
Exactly.
But yeah, we have here, they're packing up to go train. They can't train on the small island. Why can't they train on the small island?
I think it is to represent that what they are learning from him needs to be applied to the real world and not just a mental exercise, right? So this space out in the middle of the water that I kind of think in the middle of the unconscious, right? Because I was kind of likening this to a realm of meditation, sort of like inward thought. So sort of representing he is someone who can train you in better character, but to do that you can't just do it by thinking about it. You need to leave that space and take it into the world. So he needs to take them into the real world.
It's not just them, and we're going to get into it. But I think it's also Roshi that needs to go into the real world.
Oh yeah, there's an impetus for him to return to society.
Yeah, and that was started a long time ago. In this kind of completes Roshi's arc. Once we get to the end of it, everything has to do with that.
Oh yeah, that's like half of Dragon Ball.
Mm-hmm. Roshi is. He's
It's
not
pretty
just,
awesome.
and that's the thing. A lot of. I will say this before we move on. A lot of wise masters in the wise master archetypes, let's say, in stories, typically don't have the greatest character development. They're already developed, and usually the author leaves it to the main character, the protagonist, if you will, to be instructed by said old master.
I think that the wise master archetype is very unilateral. It's kind of lacking in that hierarchical structure, right? Because we're seeing a transition of like father to king comparison with Roshi, where it's like he's enacting the role of a blind father style archetype and also of the wise master, but also transitioning into the blind king as well. So it's the show is aware of the hierarchical structure of these things, right? Whereas you could say like the wise master in any other traditional role that he shows up, he doesn't also have ties to like kinghood and stuff, right? We see that a little bit more I think coming from Japanese media too. You know, you can liken that to some of the stuff that we've seen like in Dark Souls too, where it's the intersection of that thing. So it's not as simple as just saying he's a wise master, right? It's recognizing that, and we're taking it into
so
a
like
different
let's
hierarchy
say
in this
Yoda,
episode as
Yoda
well.
for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yoda's not that. Yoda's not Master Roshi, let's say.
Right, and he also isn't like a king, right? I mean, he's on a council, right? But he's not represented as something that transcends that hierarchy and then is on another level, right?
He's one which refuses to
Mm-hmm.
do that, yeah. Interesting to talk about. I just wanted to mention that before we move on. So they take the house and they get a boat. Here's their boat, and they're all surprised. It's just a little
Yeah, I like the idea that Roshi
little
can at
boat.
will also just take this, this house, just throw it into a capsule, and then he reaches into a capsule and gets a boat to go across the water. It's like, as an analog to Bulma's capsules, it's like this is something that Roshi inherently has, right? This is, speaking of potential,
It's
right?
also a lot more bare bones than Bluma's capsules, let's say, because her
Mhm.
boat would be way more stylish than this. Like,
Right.
it's just what they need to get by.
It is funny that I think in the English he says that he needs to ride in style, but that's not what the Japanese says, right?
Yeah.
The
I think
Japanese,
that
he's
was
just
interesting
being
too.
real straightforward and talking to them about what they're going to do. Well, not necessarily exactly what they're going to do, but he talks to Launch and then mentions them a bit. But yeah, it's not the same conversation. We see that coming up just constantly. It's actually become a running joke because they can't seem to consistently stick with the scale in numbers. So we're constantly seeing it come up where it's like someone says 20 in the Japanese and it's 300 in English or the other way around. This one was very accurate with the numbers for some reason, to the point that I was like, they have to know what they're doing.
Well, I would say for some of them, some of the things are specific.
Yeah.
Some of them are kind of off.
It's just strange. But yeah, we see that sort of divergence in the translation. And yeah, it basically recontextualizes, I think, Roshi's character. He's not so much of a fool in the Japanese, which is really funny to say. But there are lines that if he were reading those in English, he would not come off as exactly the same like foolish personality.
Yeah, like less silliness for sure, right?
Yeah, like there was a point where it seemed like he was trying to come up with their challenge a little bit later on the fly in the English, but in the Japanese, it's like he knows exactly what he wants them to do. So there's this kind of like, I don't know, interplay between interpretations of Roshi. Like I think it was diluted a bit for the English.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, but did want to address that. So yeah, they get on the boat and they sail on down. Roshi says this. Obviously, it's a nod to Launch sneezing. What happens when Launch sneezes? Her, let's say, less agreeable side comes out and can wreak havoc, especially in a situation like this when they're on the water.
Yeah, it's basically Roshi trying to negotiate with her, like, hey, can you be chill until we at least get onto shore?
Meaning, right? And this is also a piece of development to where Roshi is humbling himself to the idea that Blonde Launch is someone to contend with that he doesn't want to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of the first instance we've seen of that recognition.
Yeah, he has been warned, essentially. Like in the last episode. That's why I interpret, I was thinking about the context of what happened with Launch in the last episode, and it's kind of like, that was the fire over the bow of the ship, right? It was sort of like, okay, this is what it'll be like if you essentially overstep your boundaries with me.
F around and find out.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
So this is showing, yeah, he recognizes that. Yeah, I like that right here. He's pointing out specifically what they're doing, right? They have to move from their little island to a larger one, right? They have to encompass more space or take on more responsibility.
Right. It's not isolationist, right? It's still incorporating it's expanding that network.
It's the hierarchy. It's stepping up into a different degree of the hierarchy, right? It's like, here's your world. Okay, now you need to go take responsibility in a bigger,
larger
world than
zone of competence. Yeah. But and that's kind of the the thing, because at the end of the next arc or so, Roshi tells Goku that the only domain of competence left is the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so here is just the first microcosm of that. They've conquered the island by getting a peachy, peachy girl.
A peachy, peachy gal.
And
that
by
will
that we
defend
mean
herself.
recognizing the inherent value in the dual nature of femininity. That's how they were able to get off that island.
Right. It's sort of the encompassing the full respect for the feminine, rather than just what you would say Krillin's
And they never
respect
try
would
and
be, or
dress
just
up.
what Roshi's would be without.
They never try and dress up Blanche like that again.
Yeah.
It's something that I think should be examined within, like, you know, some of the criticism levied towards the show is that it's misogynistic. But it's really not at all, because every time, let's say someone acts that way, they get their just rewards for it.
Yeah, it's in the next episode it's shown for sure that very specific thing, that it's just like, how'd you say? I'm trying to think of specifically the instance, but at one point I remember in the next episode there is a basically a spelling out of that situation. But I don't want to go down that tangent.
Not yet. So this is training the rock hunt, which is actually very similar to Find That Stone on this one. I think they're closely related because there's a point to it. But we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
Anything specific you want to talk about in this? We get to see a little bit of the island from an aerial view.
Yeah, I like that it is almost like the Dragon Balls here, the way that they're scattered about are like suspended above the forest, which is kind of a reflection of what's about to happen in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a microcosm of going and finding something like a Dragon Ball.
And so there's now Kame House on this bigger island, and Goku flies off to go see it. Everyone there's chilling out, getting settled in.
Yeah, I thought that it was interesting that immediately when they land, Goku hops on a Nimbus and then wants to go explore. You know, like that's the way that Goku is.
It's actually interesting. It's almost like a cat, like going to the boundaries of its domain whenever it first gets in there, just to see how far it goes.
Yeah, just wants to understand immediately, like, okay, you know, you could say that Krillin would be more short-sighted and just, okay, I need to do what Master Roshi says. Goku is already ahead of him and like, okay, what does being here represent? Like, what responsibility am I taking on by being here? In a meta sense, right?
And what is different about this place than where we were before?
And he
what
figures
is
that
different
out immediately.
Is not this. But this is important. This is a recurring trope from Dragon Ball. I don't think it's in Z. Maybe a little bit. They go over the water in Z, I'm pretty sure. But right, this is the skating upon the the meeting of the conscious and the unconscious, and the skating between that and the Tao. Riding the Nimbus. That's why he's specifically on the water so many times. It's because the imagery is exactly the mode of being. Goku's spirit, let's say.
It's the Logos coming together with the unconscious mind, respecting the wisdom of the unconscious mind. And that is sort of the way of Tao.
That's exactly Goku's path here. Oh, you know, I did not remember that he went up here first.
Yes. I thought that was pretty cool. I actually caught that on coming back through it again. I noticed that the place that they're going to go in the next episode up this tower is introduced here while Goku's surveying the land.
I would say it's an important foreshadowing, especially for people like Toriyama doesn't plan anything.
Oh, there's obvious planning here. I mean, you can't deny it when you look at certain little things. I mean, it's not just, you know, between one episode and another. Like, there are things foreshadowed towards the end of the show that are set up now.
And so, like we were saying, Goku's exploring the boundaries of his new environment, and that includes all dimensions, especially since he can explore all dimensions.
Right, he can explore the sky, so he can explore vertically as well as horizontally.
And this is the real difference that he notices between the old island and this one, is that there are a lot of other houses here. There's people.
Right, so he stepped into society, right? He sort of transcended the hierarchy of the self now, and we're taking what we've learned about the self into that next step, you know?
Right. It's after you're 4, you then need to be integrated into society, and you can still rely on your parental structure. It's still there. Launch is still there.
Oh, the
She
house
has
is
to
still
be.
there.
But it's time to start, let's say, integrating.
Right, and that idea is that the sooner the better, right? I think that's essentially what it's pushing for with Goku and Krillin being as young as they are, and the way that this training
But they're
goes.
not young. It's so strange.
Young, I mean.
Yeah, they should be younger. They're drawn younger.
Think of how
Gohan.
old the immature protagonists of anime are now.
Well, think about Gohan, who's 4
Oh, yeah.
in Z.
That's the thing.
But he looks like this size. I don't understand it. You got to tell me like
Oh, yeah. No,
Goku's like 12 in this.
I really interpreted Goku to be like 9 or something.
Sure. But it is important for it to happen. Let's just
Yeah.
get to that point.
Yeah, it's just, I think that's something that Dragon Ball's leaning towards. Like, okay, as soon as you can, you need to be trying to take that responsibility
And so
on.
Roshi incorporates all these things without spelling it out, but you can incorporate them into, let's say, the philosophy of the turtle school. Is that this is how you exceed, and this is something Roshi will say later, exceed normal human limits.
Right, and I think that there's a parallel with that. You know, it's like the way of the turtle is to come out of your shell. Right?
Yeah.
And so when I think Roshi is talking about exceeding human limits, I think that he's a representation of human limits as he stands at the top of a certain hierarchy, right? So for him to say to exceed human limits is to come out of your shell, it's like you transcend the turtle. You transcend the hermit way of being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when he's saying, like, this is the limit of what it's like to be human, he's just talking about himself because he's already at the top of that hierarchy as a king archetype, right? That's
King of
my
that hierarchy,
interpretation,
yeah, for sure.
And so, yeah, immediately he just wants to start that training. He's like, as soon as he's there, he's like,
Training is
get off that
starting.
cloud, training starting. There are houses, let's go.
Yeah, we'll worry about that later. We will. We're going to see their interaction and integration soon, very soon.
And then Launch is like, am I training with you guys? And Roshi essentially tells her, well, you can if you want, just do whatever you like. He doesn't tell her, go get in the kitchen. He tells her, you do
It's
whatever
true.
you like.
Yes, but no, I mean, this is a misogynistic thing.
No, it's a super misogynistic show.
Well, it's also a sign of respect. It's that level of understanding. I mean, and that's the thing. Roshi knows how to behave. Turtle isn't here, but he's actually behaving somewhat decent.
Yeah, ultimately, it's like he's overcome almost like the way that old pantheons were, where it's like he's like possessed by his lust.
Yes.
But there's a lot of times throughout the series where you see that he can choose not to be that way,
Right.
as a character.
When he needs to, for sure.
But yeah, it's just funny because he tells her that, and so she says, "Oh yeah, I was gonna make supper." And he's like, "Okay, cool."
Sounds good.
But as she mentions that she's gonna make supper, she looks like she's about to sneeze, and freaks everybody out. So we're seeing now exactly just how afraid and intimidated they are by Launch now. So they respect her just by her yawning and them thinking that she might be becoming controlled by her unconscious side, you could say. They just go running. And of course, Master Roshi criticizes Krillin with it. I love his criticism there where he's like, oh, well, if you act like that, you'll never become a man.
As he's behind the rock himself.
As he is hiding behind the rock himself.
You'll never become a complete man. It's just a premonition of his own.
Yeah, he's saying, I'm not a complete man, but you want to be one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, do as I say, not as I do. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes old masters need to make sure their pupils are better than them.
Well,
which is actually
that's exactly
Roshi does a pretty
tying
good job.
That's tying exactly in with what I was saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you need to transcend me.
Yep. It's so great. It's so
Yeah.
deep.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, to that tree is exactly 100 meters, which they get Spot on.
Yep. So it was important enough that it was 100 meters that we kept it in English. But this is what I was talking about earlier, where the English reading and then the Japanese are not the same. It plays it up a little bit in the English, like Roshi didn't really have a plan for them, and he just kind of comes up with something.
He's like, first we'll what
Yeah.
will we do? We'll go
We'll
there.
start at this rock, and he's like looking around. In the Japanese, he just immediately goes, okay, the distance between this rock and this tree is exactly 100 meters. Like, he knows exactly what he wants to train them on.
It's great, too, because you can imagine he's been at this rock and tree before.
Yeah. I mean, you have to interpret that whenever he knows it. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, it's kind of changing his character up a little bit, making him more of the fool, which I don't mind. I mean, he is like a foolish king archetype. It's just.
But I think the reason they did that was because Roshi eventually, well, we're going to see in his character development, he's going through his own cycle of the fool preceding the hero.
Oh, I love this comment.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Yep. SSJ, first SSJ.
Yeah, Chris Lumber says Launch was the first to go Super Saiyan blonde. Goku learned from her, and everyone else learned from Goku.
Yep. Launch is a Saiyan, a Super Saiyajin.
Oh, man. Angels float because they take themselves lightly.
It's true. Oh, it's true.
Oh.
And here we see that Clarin is pretty confident. He's had some schooling, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny. It's not Goku saying it here, actually. It's Roshi. He's like, oh, you're really sure of yourself. And it's funny because Roshi, he's a self-aware archetype, right? Like, he knows the limits of somebody's speed. And so he knows that he doesn't even have to read Krillin's mind. He just knows, like, oh, like, as the archetypal top of the hierarchy, I know you're not good, right, comparatively. So I don't even have to know how fast you are. It's like, oh, you're so sure of yourself? And it's a great level of judgment that Roshi's character can do.
Oh, yeah, the gaze for sure. That judging gaze behind the glasses.
Yeah, that's the exact thing, right?
Yeah. Did you not get the one where he lifts the masks?
Oh, that's later.
Oh, that's later. Okay. And so Clarin is off. Running, going. Goku's off, running, going. They each pass, I think, a little over 10 seconds or so.
Mm-hmm.
And Goku wants to do it again because his shoes are busted.
Yeah. So Krillin kind of gives him a hard time about that. He's like, oh, you can't blame it on your shoes, Goku. And he's like, no, look at my shoes. And they're literally falling off of his feet. What do you think about what that means sort of symbolically for Goku? That his shoes are just like worn through.
Well, he hasn't ever he's never gone out and gotten new clothes, and it's actually something that we're gonna see in this season is whenever he gets clothes that kind of become his own staple.
Mm-hmm.
But what I mean is like this is all back from the mountains, right? And that's a rough and tumble place, not really too civilized. And shoes themselves are a technology, right? And so what I'm thinking here is Goku's ability to have that societal and technological aid in his endeavors is hindered by his lack of integration.
Yeah.
And here he gets new shoes right away once he started to integrate.
Right. He goes, oh, well, this is almost like his learning that he needs shoes.
Yeah.
More than he needs new shoes, right?
Right.
And the changing of the shoes is I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I want to throw it in here that the changing of the shoes, the removal of the shoes and putting them back on is symbolic down to a religious level. You can think of some certain things that happen in the Moses story that have to do with the shedding of the shoes and then the meeting of the hierarchy and then putting the shoes back on. It's literally what happens whenever he goes to the top of the mountain for the commandments. So this idea of the changing the shoes is actually it carries heavy symbology,
even though it's like 5 seconds here.
Well, it's funny. It's like I don't know if he knew he needed to do it, but it's the checking of a box on like, is this hierarchical and mythological? Like, it goes into that archetype immediately. It's just another check.
Right. And go ahead and sum up that Moses. What happens in the Moses
It's very
story?
complicated, but the removal of the shoes is tied into like the removal of the external flesh, and it's sort of an archetypal idea that's like, and it goes back to ritual levels of like, not to sound like I'm going off the rails, but like circumcision as well is like the removal of external flesh, and the removal ties into the removal of like animal skins and things like that. So the removal of the skins that you wear on your feet to protect your feet, and then going barefoot, and then coming back and putting on new shoes. That being tied into whenever Moses went to the top of the mountain, it was sort of like he had to. It's almost like he had to shed aspects of himself, right? Because the way that they thought back then, it was like an extension of you. Right?
So I see what you're saying. So Goku has to shed the idea that he doesn't need societal boons in order to compete.
So he needs to shed something so that he can then renew it, so to speak, right? Sort of an external
when he renews it,
aspect of himself.
Zoom zam, shoom sham.
Right. So now that he has shed those old shoes, so to speak, the old flesh from his feet, he is extremely fast. I think he blows Krillin out of the water with like an 8 or something.
Yeah, Krillin had like 10, so it was like 2 seconds. Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. So he beats the pants off of Clearin, and then Roshi starts what I was saying earlier, the human level, the normal human level.
Right. It's like you're still on a level below me, essentially. And until you're faster than me, you're not transcending the human level. So he points that out to them and decides to demonstrate, this is how fast you could be, because I'm old. Right. So he goes and prepares himself to shatter their expectations, or not really their expectations, but their images of themselves.
Yeah, he's about to make an ideal for them to chase after.
Right. He needs to demonstrate to them that they're not just the top of the hierarchy automatically, because the people they're going to be meeting very soon are not faster or stronger than them, let's say.
But the idea that the hierarchy is always worth climbing needs to be instilled early.
Yes.
Otherwise, you get arrogant. And that's one of our unholy pieces of the Trinity.
Right. So you don't end up like Pilaf.
We love. And so there we go, and Roshi zooms through, making a red aura of burning speed.
He fast. He's like 5 seconds.
Yeah. And so really this is just the explanation, or the expounding upon the idea of Roshi being at the top of the hierarchy.
Right. And in this next image, he says literally, this is what it is to surpass humans, right? You need to surpass that to surpass humans. So spells it out pretty clearly.
And what is it? We don't know yet. We don't know what the Turtle Hermit way is. All we know is that the boys are insignificant. And that's the first step, is realizing that you are not all you could be.
Right. It's the introduction of the ideal, or the potential.
And at that idea, at the mention of that idea, Krillin is amazed and Goku is ecstatic.
We see that a lot through this episode and the next episode, of just Goku grinning ear to ear and Krillin just like bewildered, exhausted,
and overwhelmed.
Scared, very much whelmed.
Very whelmed. And so
I love this.
Roshi asks for a beer.
So he asks Goku for a beer, and Goku doesn't really know what that means. He's just like, I don't know what beer is.
And so Roshi says, I have a lot to teach you besides just fighting. And it's true. And Goku learns a lot from this training, particularly. But yeah, Krillin goes inside to get the beer. But did you have a significance for that beer? Were you wanting to say?
Well, I feel like this is another Roshi test. It's kind of a weird one. But I think that you can judge what happens here by the outcome, right? Because he goes, okay, now that you know that you're under me on the hierarchy, go fetch me a beer, right? And he asks Goku to do it, and Krillin eagerly jumps up to do it himself because he wants to please Roshi, right? And so he goes run into the house, commenting to himself like, "Wow, he is above me in the hierarchy. He's not just a dirty old man, right?" And when he runs inside, I believe that causes Launch to sneeze. I think he kicks up dust or something when he runs inside, and causes Launch to sneeze, and then is punished, right? So I was trying to figure out, and I didn't really come to a conclusion. I was actually going to ask you here if you thought anything of it, about that being sort of like the balancing of the outcomes of what characters do, especially when it comes to Roshi, seems to relate to the lessons that he needs to teach people.
Right. I mean, here, it's kind of a. I mean, let me be specific here. The sin that Krillin's committing,
Sure,
is acknowledging the nakedness of the father.
yes, I think that's exactly it.
And so he's going to be cut up and stuffed like a pig is what Launch says, basically, right?
So yeah, the acknowledging of the nakedness of the father. I think that's Abraham, right?
Yeah.
Right. His Abraham's
sons.
son gaze
Yeah.
upon his nakedness, and instead of covering him back up, go to speak of his nakedness, right?
Yes. And here it's the same, like Krillin is speaking of his supposed nakedness, right?
Mhm.
His flaws, out in the open. Specifically,
He's
almost iterating that he did think that.
yeah, he's denigrating the image of the father, essentially.
Very much. And so what happens is the maternal comes to defend the spirit of the father.
The archetypal maternal.
Mm-hmm. And that's why Launch, mommy, is there.
Mommy. Which is great because this is the completion of Krillin's lesson to learn from this, because we see that it betters him.
Yeah, it does. He never says anything like that again.
Well, also, he literally improves his time running,
Yeah, that's true.
because Roshi's measuring him here in the next slide as well. I think he says in Japanese, he's come very close to his limits.
Ah, yes. I think it's like almost 9 seconds in the dub, like 8.9 or something. Like close to Goku, pretty close.
Yeah, it was close to Goku. Which is to say that Goku is operating closer to his potential than Krillin is.
Right.
And so this lesson was sort of to bring out more of Krillin's potential.
And what brings out his potential, but improving himself by learning about his own sin.
Right.
And so there we go.
By being forced to take responsibility.
And there it is, his lesson at the edge of a knife.
Yeah.
He's come close to human limits. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, this is what happens. You denigrate the spirit of the father at your own risk. You might end up emasculating your own self there.
Yeah, and right here, Launch has sneezed again, and now she's the maternal. And she's like,
it's just a warning. It's just a warning. Like,
always a
do
warning.
not sin around Launch, because that's going to bring out that primal spirit, that which opposes, right? That it's almost not the tyrannical mother, but it's almost Mother Nature. Like,
yeah, it's the
when
destructive
you sin, when you have
maternal,
hubris, let's say, right? What happens? Nature comes and shows you what for, and that's exactly
it
what
humbles
happened.
you.
And I'm pretty humbled.
Yeah,
I would say. And so then the sun is setting, and I think it's particular that we have this shot here, because this is really a unique day. This is really the testing day, preliminary diagnostics things for the boys. And so it's the end of their old lives. And that's why we see the sunset here, and we don't really see the sunset again for a while. We see some sunrises, but we don't see the sunset for a while. And that specifically is because it's the end of their old modes of being. Their spirits will be no more after this. In particular, at the very end, they'll both change clothes forever.
Yeah, they will. And that idea, I'm talking about the skins, the external, the clothes being an extension of the character.
Launch is beyond human limits.
Oh, yeah.
Launch has exceeded human limits. She could have caught him.
But you see what I'm saying, you know, with the clothes, the external
yeah.
adornments being the extension of the self,
Yes,
shown that
yeah.
way. Like they do that specifically with, you know, we'll think of Goku's weighted clothes even, right? What it means to
They
take
do
it
that
off.
with a lot of characters,
Yeah.
not just Goku.
Oh yeah,
All right, so we see the sunset. I wanted to mention that. We see Master Roshi riding upon this stone. Now, why is it a stone?
whenever I think about the archetype of the stone, it's sort of the thing that is unmoving, unchanging, right? It's what you orient yourself towards or what you center towards. You can think of like the standing stone or the
Or you think about how
obelisk.
people talk about their rock, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, my wife or my husband is my rock, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is something that keeps you grounded. But also, what do the Dragon Balls turn into?
They turn into stones.
Right. And let's say with enough pressure, we've been through this a little bit, but coal turns into diamonds, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's inherent value. Here's a piece of earth, right? And in this, the Roshi has articulated his being upon this eternal piece of the earth. I think it's poignant because a couple things. One, the stone is not something that can be, let's say, easily replicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, Roshi's articulation onto this stone, will help us understand the actual test that we're going to see in a second.
Yeah, I think it's also tied into Roshi's connection to magic words.
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
You know, I think throughout even the most important things he ever does,
It's almost
tied
runic.
to his ability to put magic words onto things and to speak magic words.
Well, let me say too, it's almost runic in its origin. Like this is like finding a rune, finding a magical word, right?
Right.
Turtle, speaking turtle will grant you sustenance.
Right.
So let's get into that. So Roshi throws the stone with his name on it. And he says this: searching for something may not seem like much, but this requires an awful lot of mental strength and concentration.
I think this is the fact that it emulates the search for the Dragon Balls is also representative of what they're learning in this lesson, right?
Well, this is really a lesson for Krillin. Goku succeeds in this easily because he's already
Goku
been
has
through
already
this.
done it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Find this value, right?
Well, you think of Krillin as this extension of Goku's character too. It's like, okay, here's something adding onto your character, but it needs to be developed, right? So developing Krillin is sort of like, okay, you've done this before, but now enact it with.
Well, it's another piece
Krillin
of another piece of brilliance that Krillin is there to allow Goku to grow from this because he also can. But it's interesting because Goku's kind of misses the lesson that he should have learned from the last time, but we'll get into that. So they have to go search for the stone. Whichever one loses also goes without supper. So that's what I meant, right? Finding the magic word turtle will allow you to have sustenance.
Right, and there's also this very old idea about fasting and holiness, right? This sort of idea that's like, okay, if you can orient yourself enough towards the turtle way that you can find it in a difficult situation, you have earned your sustenance. If you don't, then you need to fast to become more holy, to become more of yourself and less of what is external to you, so to speak, right?
Exactly. And so we see the two different approaches. We see Goku's straightforward approach. He's done this a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
He's done this with Bluma, and he can find value. He can seek it out because he walks the path. Now, Krillin doesn't even think he can do it, and that's the first sin.
Right, Krillin is searching for the path to get to it. So he's like, oh, I'm going to have to go down around that way. Goku's making his path because he knows that, well, ultimately it's represented here that the closest path between two things is a straight line.
And Goku just...
And so he beelines for where it was thrown because he's also, I mean, there's a courageous nature to Goku that Krillin does not have as well. There's a sort of knowing that he is on the right path versus Krillin not knowing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so Krillin decides to adopt not only arrogance, but deceit. And he brings back the rock, his counterfeit rock, just as Roshi is about to commit another sin, let's say, one of his vices.
Right. He is close to enacting his will on Lunch. Right. And she's telling him, as this is happening, I think it's right here, that she got a really good deal on the fish that she's cooking for them. And he's like, that's nice. And
Blind
he's just
as he is.
staring at her ass.
Yeah. Blind as he is, he didn't happen to ask about the fish, which would have saved him in the future. But again, be better than your master, let's say.
That's what this is all about.
Right. And actually, that's something I do want to mention, too. It's almost a prerogative for those who are taking pupils under their wing is admit that you're flawed enough to where you would want your students to be better.
Right. I think it's
or even more, not to worship your master. Like we have a friend, you and I, who worships his old Taekwondo master as if he's a god. And I'm like, well, you could do better than that.
Right. Why wouldn't you want to transcend that?
Yeah.
And that there's definitely a holy nature to what Roshi is doing versus you think of a more adversarial master who would not ultimately want their student to transcend them because they think that that it's a zero-sum game, that it's all about power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Roshi realizes that it's a positive thing, that it's not zero-sum, and that it's not just about power, but it's about, well, what we're seeing here, the development of character, that your character should transcend the character of the person who trained you.
Exactly. And Roshi's character is very flawed, as we can see.
As we can see here.
And so the stone that Krillin brought is not going to fly. He
tries to imitate his handwriting.
The old king's gaze goes right through that deceit.
And of course it doesn't work.
I mean, think about Bluma's attempted deceit, went right through it. Krillin's attempted deceit goes right through it.
Yeah, and this is because it's symbolically like, this is what you threw out, right? And it's like, this is a horrible representation of my way.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of my house.
It's a perverted,
yeah,
almost blasphemous way.
Mm-hmm.
So get the F out. And so they go back to the jungle, and Krillin finds Goku there, and he has the stone. He said it carried the smell of the old timer, you know. What do you think about that? Why is it the smell of the old timer?
The smell of the old timer. I don't know. I hadn't thought much about the smell of it, other than the fact that Goku, he's operating on a more unconscious level than Krillin is. While Krillin's trying to search with his eyes, Goku realizes that you can't just rely on those senses to find something, right? Krillin doesn't have a nose.
Well, not only does Krillin not have a nose, but I mean, you're on the right track, I would say. I would say the olfactory processes that go on, right, it's more primal. And the stone and the rune, primal. Goku is adopting the mode of being that his challenge is presenting in front of him. Where Clearin is trying to use his own knowledge and his, let's say, his will to exert over the challenge, which is the wrong way to go about it. You have to adjust your frame, and that's what this is saying here.
Right, it's like Goku has humbled himself to the challenge of the thing.
Right.
Rather than trying to circumvent the difficulty of it, right? And because that's the way of being that you should embody, then he's able to find it.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing, it has to be, let's say, the old timer. It has to be the remnants of the old timer on the stone, obviously because he wrote it, but more because Goku is attracted to that spirit. He can almost sense powers at this point.
Well, I want to point out, and this is just weird to me, it just came to mind that I had already mentioned, going up and getting the stone tablets, and it's like, here we have the word etched onto the stone that you need to follow your intuition to find, right?
And you got to go into a dark jungle to get it.
Right. It's similar to the mountain in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm. And we will see a mountain. But anyways, Krillin steals it, tricks him and steals it, which is what I meant because he's also tricked by Pilaf. He just gets tricked.
Yeah, I mean, that's why a lot of people are just like, Goku's stupid. That's his whole character, is he's dumb.
No, he's trusting.
Right, and if that's your interpretation of being trusting of the character of other
He's
people.
trusting and white-pilled, mega white-pill.
Yeah. Be like Goku. Don't get black-pilled.
And so, no way the competitive... And this is exactly the black pill here. The competitive world is an unforgiving one.
And then Goku doesn't... Well, we'll see.
Goku, there's a few instances. He falls off the bridge. He comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And Krillin says, what a persistent guy. It's time to tussle.
Right. And so, it's going to come to a conflict.
And here it is.
No way.
I would say since spirits, chat. I would say more since spirits, because we're also going to see some Goku sensing spirits as mode of being later on in the tournament.
The way that people are, or the way that their actions
exactly. He's going to be able to sense
something.
those spirits. Not necessarily power levels yet, because those don't even represent what a lot of people think, I would say.
Yeah.
It depends on who you're talking about with the power level. But
whenever you run out of ways to represent the hierarchy, it sure helps to have something to fucking point towards.
That's true. So then we see the conflict here. Krillin gives it his all, but is ultimately easily bested by Goku. And this is because, obviously, arrogance and deceit are not going to be able to beat forthrightness and honesty.
Yeah, the way that Goku is already centered. And he's the rightful owner of this stone because he's earned it.
Goku never strikes. No, Goku never makes an attempt to strike.
Right. It shows like a cloud of limbs flying, but we don't ever see him actually strike him. He just puts him on the ground and he's like, all right, you give up?
And he does. But like the great Star Wars saga, it rhymes, and we're going to see the same trick happen later.
Mm-hmm.
So Krillin says, all right, I give up, throws the stone, and Goku chases after it, thinking that that's the one.
Now, this says something about Goku, right? Because, he literally didn't have time to look at it, but I think there's a dichotomy here between the fact that Roshi can determine whether or not it's the real stone, just by inspecting it. Goku here doesn't see the difference and goes chasing after the false one.
Well, it's not like he has time to see it, but sure.
But symbolically speaking, it's...
But here, it is just the deceit of Krillin and his reveling in his own sin here.
Yeah, and by the lechery of the two of Roshi and lechery of Roshi I would say the lechery of Roshi and the deceit of Krillin makes it a zero-sum game. Ultimately, this whole test, right? And so Goku doesn't succeed either, right? Goku is tricked and he's deceived by Krillin, and you could say that Roshi wouldn't be, right? So he doesn't pass the test either. That's why it's a zero-sum game as well.
But it's okay, because Goku has...
This is how Goku learns it.
Yeah, this is how Goku learns it. That's what I was going for.
Yeah.
And so then we see the outcome, and... yeah, it's not very good for old Goku there. They're all eating. It looks great. They have their puffer... Oh, puffer fish.
Oh, no.
It's almost like the sins came back.
And now we realize
to bite them in the ass.
That if Roshi was paying attention to launch and actually, doing so in a forthright manner, they would have known that she got such cheap fish at the market because it was not used for cooking.
Nope. It wasn't supposed to be. And yeah, we also learned that Krillin, had he not been deceitful, would not have been poisoned, and Goku would have instead. But it wouldn't play out the same way. It couldn't by necessity. Goku could not get poisoned.
Goku would have smelled it out with his nose, basically.
Yep, exactly. With
that's what would happen in the story, right? We're not saying literally, but that's how the canon would work out because that's the lesson.
So they get sick, and they decide they need to wait to train the next day, and I think that's what we have next.
Yeah, in the next slide.
Yeah. And so Launch is sick as well, but she doesn't turn blue or anything. They're like passed out, so they take the day off.
Yeah, and I say that Goku didn't pass the test either, also because we never see him eat in this episode.
It's true. One
You know,
of
he
the few
doesn't-
times that food is present. I think maybe the only time food is present that Goku doesn't eat.
Yeah, he doesn't earn his food in this one.
He has to maintain that spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
and he does it from now on. So
Yeah, so this was a hard first lesson for Goku, and it's an ongoing lesson for Krillin.
yeah, and so they take the day off. I think this is just saying that the sins that you commit early on will set you back,
Yeah.
and it is setting them back a whole day. And
Yeah.
you may not. I mean, that's not much, but a whole day is a whole day.
Yeah, and you can see, it's this episode is ultimately about a failure on the way that Roshi is, right? And it's trying to delineate that for Goku so that he can transcend it.
It's almost, and it's a great A and B plot integrated together.
Yeah, because the same thing happens across the two characters, right? Between Roshi and Krillin. Roshi fails and Krillin fails in
And
their
we
own
see
different
their
ways.
first mirroring, really. I mean, we saw it last time, but like this is their actions mirroring, right? It's a piece of the unholy that's in possessing them that has caused them both to be poisoned. And so that's pretty much the end of Find That Stone. And on the next episode, we'll talk about a community favorite, milk
boy.
delivery.
I love this episode.
It's so good. It's when the boys deliver some milk, and they skip 2, 3, 4. So don't remember.
So now that they have
Bam.
learned the necessity of coming out of your shell and transcending what the turtle is, they have to come out of their shell to society.
Yeah, they have to go integrate, and that's what this episode is about. Any other final words for this episode? Find That Stone, Brock.
No, I think you covered everything that I was thinking about. And I
Good.
think we're on the same page about just about everything here.
Good. All right. Well, if you liked what you heard, please subscribe. And remember, I am your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brok.
And we'll see you guys next time.